France.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. Welcome to everybody. So I'm going to present you what are the scope and expected impact of this call. So can I move the slide? How can we do that? Okay, so the background of this call, which is the second call of the partnership, is from the general context of, on one hand, the European policies and European objectives in terms of the European Green Deal, the Farm to Fork strategy, the biodiversity strategy, an action plan for organic production, and many others that are the general frame of where we want to go in the next future. The second point is the idea that is now largely shared among scientists and stakeholders, which is that agroecology is clearly an approach that is that can accelerate the transition to more sustainable agriculture. Then, regarding this idea of sustainable agriculture, we know that it means that we have to manage, in fact, different type of objectives, such as, for instance, improving food security and protecting biodiversity, or different type of challenges. And there is also, of course, you know that these ideas of having a kind of managing simultaneously today's private goods and tomorrow's public goods. Okay, in this broad context, we have this agroecology partnership that Nicolas presented already. And this idea in this partnership is to promote agroecology through an approach based on living labs and research infrastructure. And I will go back later on in my presentation of this idea of living lab, which is also in our call. So in terms of how we define agroecology, so in terms of science, I would say, so as a scientific discipline, agroecology is in the interface between agronomy and ecological sciences, but with also contribution from social sciences. And last point, which is important for this specific call, this is agroecological transition don't concern only agricultural practices, but also the transformation of agri-food value chain. So this second call, the title of this second call is Integrating Environmental, Economic and Social Perspective in Assessing the Performance of Agroecology, Value Chain and Policy Implication. So it's clearly targeted to this idea of performance and assessing and improving this performance. It is based on three ideas. The first one is this assessment is essential for a better recognition of agroecology by the agricultural sector, by the market, and by the policymakers. So this assessment of the performance must be addressed by integrating these three dimensions. That means environmental, economic, and social dimensions. And third idea, as I just told you before, the value chain upstream and downstream of agroecological production system, the private and public incentives should be able to support the transition, and they should be addressed and taken into consideration to foster the transition. From this call, we expected as outcomes or impacts different type of outcomes. Knowledge, practical oriented, that means tools or innovation that could be available to the farmers and the sectors to increase the uptake of agroecological practices at different scales. And increase knowledge, but also knowledge transfer and capacity of farmers and advisors and all the people that are working with farmers to implement agroecological practices. As I said, increased performance is very crucial in this call. And lastly, the transfer, or at least the sorry, the contribution for science policy, for the policymakers, sorry, through enhanced science policy interface that should be, that are expected from this call. So that in this call, and that's very important for information for you, because you are going to have to choose if you want to apply to this call between topic 1 or topic 2. And that's not very easy for you, and that was not very easy for us to disentangle those two topics because they are very interacted, but interconnected. So the first one needs determine and assess benefits, impact, and trade-offs of agroecology and identify best practices. And the second one is more transform value chain, businesses, and policies to facilitate the transition to agroecology. So, of course, if I say that you have to choose, that means that you can choose, let's say, topic 1, but you can integrate in topic 1 issues related to value chain or policies. And the reverse is true also. It's not because you are choosing topic 1 that we're not going to speak about agroecological practices. But it is that you have to do it because, as we will see later on, this will link at the very end of the story to two different ranking lists. So let's say next slide. So I'm going to go a little bit into those two topics just in order to give you an idea of what we expect. So on the first topic, which is determine and assess benefit, impact, and trade-offs of agroecology and identify best practices, we have two themes. So you can consider one or both of them. So the first one is methods and procedures to tackle trade-offs in agroecological production. So what is in black just after this title are examples. You are not obliged to choose to think about them. Of course, you have to read it and it is here to inspire you in terms of what you want to develop, but it's not strictly defined. You have an idea in terms of methods of procedures. So it's more in terms of methodology of assessing the performance. And the performance mean benefits on one hand, impacts on the other hand, but as we know, there is also this issue of trade-offs because sometimes, let's say, for example, environmental and economic impacts are not going the same way, or even in the environmental impact, you can have climate in one hand, biodiversity in the other one, and sometimes it's not easy to determine the efficiency of agroecology on those different compartments or elements, and that's clearly the reason why we have this topic 1. So regarding methods and procedure to tackle trade-offs, you have some example here, such as I just said, how to describe value conflicts or goal conflicts, how to implement new approach and tools, or you can combining existing one to do this integrating assessment. You can also build models or test models for doing this assessment. Then we have the second theme inside this topic, which is more on scenario analysis. So that means that you have to consider in a broad analysis to build scenario in order to identify the best practices at different spatial and temporal scales. That's the idea of scenarios, is to be able to aggregate everything and to look sometimes in the future and sometimes even in the long term. So here we have ideas of course, generating knowledge and evidence on the contribution of agroecology to the economic sustainability and viability, co-design different scenarios regarding the long-term ecological and socio-economic implication, which is this idea of looking not only to the short, to the current situation, but also to the long term, adopting circular economic principle. And the idea of this team 2 is to build these scenarios in order to have different type of decision makers, but in particularly the decision making of policymakers. So you have to address, sorry, but that's okay. So in topic 1 as in topic 2, so you have to choose topic 1 or topic 2, then you have to do your own choice to take into consideration both teams or one or at least one, and do your own proposal inside of this. Okay, topic 2 now. So topic 2 is clearly targeting value chain and policies. So how value chain can be transformed and diversified, but how, sorry, that's not the exact title. Okay, so we will do. So the exact title is Transform Value Chain, Business and Policies to Facilitate the Transition of Agroecology. So the team 1 is more dedicated to transformation and development of business model in the value chain to facilitate the agroecological transition, which that means that it is that it encompasses different type of ideas. Consider new business model. How can new business model could value the social and economic benefits, which is really crucial issues when we talk about performance. If we can assess the performance, then we have the idea of the valorization, the value of this performance. And it goes, for instance, through this second point, the second item, through traceability and certification procedure. How these benefits of agroecological approach could be used to contribute to better traceability and certification procedures. Then you have also the idea of value chain are concerned by the transition through the development of new option, new innovation, new solution, new technology, either at the upstream or downstream sectors. And we have a lot of examples of what the farmers need in order to be able to implement the agroecological transition in terms of machinery, but also in terms of outlets for the production and so on. So for instance, to be able to collect, to process, and to add value to new crops that would be efficient in terms of agroecological production. So in this same topic, we have the team 2, which is more on coordination among actors, social innovation and policy. So this one, I would say, is more addressing social sciences issues. Of course, social sciences should be linked with other disciplines, and that's a general comment for all this call is that transdisciplinarity or multidisciplinarity is really what we expect. But in this team 2, I would say economists, sociologists, and other social scientists are clearly targeted to be in. I mean, agroecological transition is not only a question of technological innovation, but it's also a question of social innovation and even innovation in policies. So that's the idea of this team 2. So it could, for instance, concern the way to increase the trust between producers and consumers, but it also can consider also the way the logistic and infrastructure is organized. That is more an organizational innovation. And of course, it's considered also the policies, or let's say the incentives that could be from the market or from the public sector. Next slide. So that's more or less a general recommendation. Maybe there are some general ideas, but you know that you have to have at least 3 participating countries. I mean, partners from at least 3 participating countries in your proposals. that you should follow a co-creation and multi-actor approach with relevant stakeholders. It depends on your project. It could be farmers, it could be a company, it could even be in some case consumer or citizens or local authorities, and it should be inspired by the Living Lab methodology that I'm going to explain rapidly. You should apply a multidisciplinary approach. I already said that. What is important also is to take into consideration local condition, because we know that agroecology is very context dependent. I mean, dependent of specific local condition. So you would probably need to do that. You can consider the experience gathered by the organic farming sector. I mean, this call could be applied either to conventional farming or to organic farming. Both should be improved, and for both type, or even more than two, I mean, there is a different type of agriculture between also strictly organic farming or let's say conventional farming. But in all these type of farming, the improvement of performance and the assessment of performance is needed. Sometimes, of course, we are talking about applied research, but sometimes you should capitalize or use or valorize fundamental research that could give very good ideas and avenues to do new things. And in the same idea, the farmers' knowledge or the traditional knowledge, what is already known, especially, for instance, in the way the practices are implemented, is interesting to be considered. Next slide. So what is a living lab approach? So it is in the core of the partnership. So you will find also information on that in the strategic research and innovation agenda that Nicolas recommend you to read. So there is a European definition and even label of living lab that we put here in this slide, that said that it is an open innovation ecosystem based on systematic user co-creation, placing citizen and/or end user at the center of the innovation process. So having a living lab, it is an organization that innovates according to these principles, but also refers to the innovation project that follows this guideline. So I think it's quite clear. But I think it's quite clear, but I have two other slides to complement this. So what does that mean in terms, what is an efficient, productive living lab? There is some condition. It means that it should follow a multi-method approach. It is based on co-creation by iterating. It's not a top-down or a linear process. It is the contrary of a linear process. It really means that there are different iteration in terms of connecting this different group of stakeholders. It means an active implication of end users since the beginning of the research project. It's not at the end that they will be contacted to see if they want to adopt. It is really an active implication since the beginning. They are using real life setting. It's not a lab. It is in real situation. And of course, it can implicate different kind of stakeholders. Next one. So that's what I say is true for agroecology also. What could be added in terms of the specificity of living labs when we are talking of agriculture, of agroecology, is that it's very dependent of the local situation. That is what we said about agroecology. We know that it's general. What we could do in terms of transition to agroecology will not be the same in such or such location, depending on the pedoclimatic context, but also the social environment and a lot of things. So this is this idea of strong local embeddedness. And the origin of living lab, the living labs that are already existing, came from sometimes a group of farms or networks of citizens or community. It could have different type of origin. What is also a characteristic of this living lab is that there is different type of knowledge and innovation. Could be very practice oriented or policies oriented. And last, there are different living labs that, the different living labs that already exist are different scales. Some are really limited to some networks of farms, for instance, few farms in a specific environment, but it can be at the scale of a territory or regional. So what we expect in this call, it is the same than in the last one. We don't want you necessarily, you can do it, of course, but it's not necessarily to build your project on an already existing labeled living lab. What we want is that you be inspired by this methodology and that you try to implement a methodology that is close to what is done in living lab. Maybe it is my last slide, I'm not sure, yet it is. So I hope I've been clear. I realize that there is a mistake on the title of topic 2 in one slide that we're going to change, because the topic 2 title is what you have in the paper. I mean in the document that you probably have already downloaded and read. So, of course, I'm open to answer to any type of question. I don't have a look on the chat, but you will tell me the question later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Florence. We can stop the recording now. Thank you, Florence. And